For good or for bad, I don't have much of a voice. Um, so I'm just going to introduce my practice, and then a very dear friend and is going to take over, and it's going to be wonderful for me to sit back and watch him give you his interpretation of our work. That's Arjun Malik. So I actually started my practice very, very long ago, in 1990. It was a year of major global change. Gorbachev was standing on Fifth Avenue, Perestroika was happening, a new world order was emerging, and Narasimha Rao was opening India up. For me, actually, I was just young and confused and idealistic, and there were three words that I recall being very important at the time. Sustainability was very big, and I think Al Gore's An Inconvenient Truth was soon to show up, and climate change had become real. Diversity was very big because the world was opening up. Globalization had happened. The idea of diversity was important, multiculturalism, multipluralism. And the last thing that was suddenly very important in 1990 was democracy, because America had won. Sadly, I look at the world 27 years later, and there seems to be a backlash to all three. Our practice over the last 27 years really has been about all three. Sustainability, and for us, sustainability has totally been about working with the sun, the wind, and the earth. And I hope it's evident in all our projects. Diversity has really been about working across the entire country, fortunately for us. We've literally been able to work in all the different parts of the country, and hopefully the few projects that I've selected for today will show you the diverse solutions to incredibly different cultural and climatic landscapes that we've been able to access. The democracy part of it is both with our work as well as to some extent with our studio. Our studio really has grown and into developing some very, very strong architects. There are two people here who literally run the practice. That's Vaishali and Sarika. They're in here and they've been with the practice for the last 15 to 16 years, and we spend a lot of time ensuring that everyone in the practice has a voice. I'm going to now hand it over to Arjun to go through the rest of the projects.
Okay, so if you want to just hop in or correct me or something,
sure.
just point it out. Yeah, I got the mic.
Okay, I'll wait
Please,
right here.
Perfect.
Excuse me.
Hi, so this is going to be interesting. I think the first project that Shimul kind of ran me through, and I'm kind of familiar with her work over the years, and it's quite easy to speak about it because I completely relate to everything that she does and everything that she says. The first project that we're showing over here is the Synergy Lifestyles in Karur in Tamil Nadu. It's the design for a factory, a textile factory. And I think when Shimul spoke about sustainability, the first really important part was to understand the local context, everything from the social structures to the vernacular architecture, both in terms of its visuals as well as in terms of its devices and its anatomies, in terms of response to a particular social and climatic context. So these are some of the representations of vernacular architecture of the region. There's a wonderful earthiness to it. It's built completely around courtyards with local materials. You can see the quality of these spaces. the central courtyards, which I think was one of the strongest elements that informed the design process.
Karur is actually a little textile town where they're building these large glass and steel factories, which they're unable to sustain because they have to be air conditioned, and then they can't afford it. So we decided to turn that on its head.
So one of the major influences was the courtyards. The second was, I think, these very specific profiles of gabled roofs. And it's quite interesting because Synergy is now, I think, very much an Indian brand, but exporting, and you can find it in some of the finest stores all over the world. But this is an example of a bullock cart where some of the local materials were actually transported to site. And I think besides the understanding of devices and material, there was a very clear representation of a linear workflow and a functionality that's represented through the linear site and how material enters through one end, has a very logical movement through the space, and then exits as a finished product at the other end. The extensive use of the local rubble masonry, again, building with local material, with local labor, and the use of the traditional vaulted systems with the local terracotta bricks. Again, when we come into, and I'm going to expand here, Shimul, sorry. We always consider industrial architecture and factories and warehouses to be the sterile subject, but when you're able to combine the functionality and workflows of those with a very strong connection to vernacular expression, you land up with some very, very rich spaces and solutions. And you can see that the courtyards that develop within the project, the way they bring light into the space, they create pose points. The water body is actually a rainwater harvesting mechanism, and just it's quite wonderful, the quality of light that just filters into the space. And on one hand, we had the rubble masonry on the exterior of the project, but towards the interior, where the human interface became more exaggerated, it was softer kind of plaster with the cooler whites. Even the doors and the windows were built with the help of local ironmongers and using locally sourced wood. So everything somehow seems to stem from the region. You can see some of the construction shots. The image on the right are the terracotta, the hollow blocks that were used to structurally construct the vaults, and then topped with a very thin layer of concrete. This gave you wonderful insulation properties and also gave you some sense of material texture on the underside. And you can see the finished space where, with the monitor lights being very close to the equator, we know that the north light is something that we need to harness within the internal space. But also ventilators would then exhaust the space and let the hot air flow out. So again, something that's, I think, completely sympathetic to the environment. Yeah, I remember this project. It was in fact, and you can see that little symbol down there on the left, the World Architecture Festival Awards. They loved the project so much, but they weren't quite sure what category to put it into. So they instituted a small projects category just for this particular project. It's a very small plot. This one's in Bangalore, right?
That's right.
Yeah,
In
so
the
Bangalore, so very affable weather. It's much. It's very conducive to building naturally ventilated, non-air conditioned space, and I think that project is very much built around those sustainable techniques and having these wonderful trees towards the two sides. Sorry, I'm waving my fingers, but no one can see them. I wish we had a pointer for that. It's a very simple and strong idea of carving up the space in such a way as to introduce a slender shaft of a courtyard, which also became the primary staircase, not just as a means of circulation, but as a means of instituting a collaborative space into the center of this project. It's an advertising agency, and I think somewhere there was a commonality in thinking that real creative thought and collaboration doesn't need to happen within walled rooms. It happens more in the central space. So you find people sitting on these steps, crossing each other, discussing ideas, little balconies overlooking the steps, and it becomes both a thermal device for ventilation as well as bringing light very deep into the center of this space. That's an image out there. You can see the trees. You can see how lightly the building sits in the context. The pivoted panels can, they close, they open. The idea of wall and window tends to get inverted with the larger glazing panels to bring in good light to look outside, and then the walls that actually become movable for different conditions of light and of ventilation. You can see, I think the images, in a sense, are self-explanatory. On the left is a conference room. It's absolutely stunning to be able to have conferences in that kind of space. You can see how nature starts to push into the space. You can see the quality of light starts to expand both horizontally and vertically. The cast concrete walls, which become the primary structure of the project. So there's an honesty both of structure becoming the primary aesthetic of the project. No false ceilings. The slabs, as they're cast, they're left as raw concrete. There's a certain amount of thinking and intensity and rigor that goes into even leaving these spaces exposed. So I think overall a certain honesty of expression, not relying on appendage and artifice to develop the aesthetic value of the project. And yeah, you can see on the right the way the stairs are configured, a heavy material yet being quite light. You can see the way light filters through it. On the left, you can see a 10-foot tall jolly panel. 16-foot tall, sorry, my bad. A 16-foot tall jolly panel that's configured with wood and acrylic, and each of these 6-inch strips are actually operable to, again, allow different conditions of light and ventilation to impact the building. And that's one of the executive suites. You can see the beautiful trees outside. A very, very simple material palette in terms of the IPS floors and the raw concrete, the use of wood, the use of color through the upholsteries, the way the walls can move and turn. And I think that's something that's very strong about the practices. They have this wonderful ethos of detailing with simple materials, but with a very rich, I think, interpretation of tradition and craft that comes into every one of their projects. I think, in a sense, an expression of the same. It's just it's the beautiful quality of space. And
so
yes,
the louvers were made out of acrylic polymer. It's a material that hasn't traditionally been used in an external wall setting, but so 4 louvers open with 1 handrail and can be placed at different degrees.
And these wonderful pole points as an extension of the courtyard, where informal discussions can take place, and just quiet, I think, spaces for introspection.
That's a film that was made by the, where's the music?
A break, we eat a lot, or
By
try
the
to walk
clients.
the dogs, but you just can't blame us. Our office is such. We're here to work, and sometimes we do. We play FIFA or race a car, but you just can't blame us. Our office is such. Our days start at 12 and nights never end, with the wind so soothing and the place so pleasing. You just can't blame us. Our office is such.
We are Nirvana Films, and we love our new office. Pure production bliss, now in a new outfit.
This project I actually know quite well. This is a house in Alibag. For those of you unfamiliar with Alibag, it's connected to Bombay through Navi Mumbai, but I think most people tend to access it by ferry, and it's quite wonderful to somewhere have that sense of departure from urban chaos and this entry into a more kind of rural setting. And it's quite interesting when Shimul explained the process to me, that they wound up on site and there were these wonderful large trees, and there were a lot of leaves that were strewn all over the site, and somewhere just the abstract and organic configurations of those leaves combined with the effect of light coming into the trees formed, in essence, the core of the project. So they actually picked up a couple, and apparently on the boat back, they started to arrange them in gaps between the existing trees and started to come up with these sometimes isolated and sometimes interconnected pavilions, completely drawing upon the anatomy of the leaf. Would you like me to explain the plan in detail, or I think the essence of the... And you can see there's a certain grace to the entire, to the form that the leaf generates, and it's also, I think when you're getting into this kind of territory, it becomes quite risky because some of these devices and ideas aren't always conducive to the site and the context and the climate. But in this particular case, by taking the leaves and arranging them and orienting them at different heights and sloping them in a particular direction, one could start to protect from the harshness of the south and west, sun and monsoon, and then start to let in more of the good north and east light and the prevailing breezes. And you can see the structural system are these steel piers filled up with concrete and then simply polyurethane left there. So it's a very neutral, powerful palette, but it also allows, I think, nature to take precedence in terms of seeping through. I think the layering of the architectural device never quite, it doesn't argue with nature. It's quite sympathetic with its surroundings. And for me, this was the most interesting image because when we start to look at the leaf, I mean, one can look at the structure of the leaf and the anatomy and the shape of a leaf, but the real beauty of the leaf is the way they tend to aggregate and come together, and how light tends to percolate with different intensities through these crevices where the leaves start to overlap. And I think it's been handled quite sensitively. I can tell you from personal experience, this is not an easy subject to handle at all. And you can see how the larger roof of the veranda overlapped with the roof of the den, which is a slightly more sealed space that is more conducive to, I think, use throughout the year. When maybe it gets too hot or it's raining too hard, I think the winds tend to lash laterally and carry water through those spaces. But again, even when one needs to create sealed boundaries within these leaves, they've been dealt with quite interestingly without in any way, I think, losing the actual character of the space. Yeah, I think the way the landscape flows, the way the water comes through, and I particularly like if you look at towards the right-hand section of that roof, as the light tends to reflect off the water and start to form these dappled effects of the underside. There's a very interesting conversation between the language of light filtering in through leaves and how it tends to form through inversions and reflections throughout the space. And again, I think to also work with the spaces between the trees, because this courtyard that was organically formed between the leaves and the existing trees really became, I think, the space the clients tend to use most, and it became, I think, really the soul of that project in a sense. Again, as with all the works, the material palette is very, very restrained in order to let light, nature, the form of the space, the treatment of the space to take precedence and not tend to layer it up and clutter it too much with too many added components and confusion. This is, again, a very well-documented hotel, featured quite extensively. A hotel in Tirupati, and I think we're all quite familiar with the fact that a lot of religious pilgrimage sites are anything but catering to the idea of spirituality or the peace and the introspection required of those sort of spaces. They tend to become quite chaotic, and somewhere, I think, in terms of trying to create a space very close to the pilgrimage site, or the main, I think, Tirupati temple, in trying to create a space of reflection, but once again tapping into both the spiritual philosophy of the space as well as the physical structure of the temple complex, in terms of being the walled, introverted garden with the orthogonal layout, with the circumambulatory spaces, with the center being a space of meditation, the courtyard, and especially the center being the lotus. I think there's a lot of significance in terms of the culture of that place and of the temple in particular. And if you can see on the left is the 10 avatars of Vishnu, and it's been used quite subtly in the interiors of the space to develop different devices and aesthetics for different spaces. I don't quite remember the specific. I know the Ram, the social animal, formed the banquet space, and Krishna, the playful, formed some of the elements within the dining and the primary interactive spaces. But I think the real strength of this project, and you can see, is the quality of meditation and the meditative quality, as well as the reflection, just the silence of the water, the slenderness of the columns that are supporting the primary, the circumambulatory walkways, the horizon, the very interesting form of the central temple, of the lotus that forms the central pavilion sitting in the water. So yeah, you can see the rooms. The rooms are forming on the left, again looking into this courtyard. It all revolves around this reflective water sheet. And the form of the lotus that is very cleverly engineered with a combination of steel and decking, and then used with a softer material with the veneer on the underside.
That's right.
I think you can start to see the relationship of the forms to the hill, the wonderful scale of the wall to the right, the kind of tessellation of the lotus, taking the traditional form and, in a sense, bringing it into a contemporary context. And this is one of the spaces, I think this is where the Krishna influence
restaurant
came in, with the patterning and the colors. Yeah, and that's the underside of the pavilion. Yeah, it's quite a special space over there. This was a particularly telling shot of, you can sometimes tell when someone's paid attention to the site and the surroundings when this happens, because just the idea of the very strong axiality and the sense of continuity, as well as on one sense you've got this very strong a vertical axis that pushes through, and then you've got this wonderful horizontal line where you can catch the hills from where you're standing. So somewhere you start to connect back to nature, and I think that in itself brings a certain spirituality back to the process. Museum for Jain Heritage. I think this one is under construction right now.
Well, this is one of those projects that you wait and you wait and you wait, and it just doesn't get built. Hopefully, you guys will bring us some luck and it'll get built.
This is obviously, again, a very deep and I think abstract subject when one comes into a museum of Jain heritage, because the Jain philosophy itself, I think, built very strongly around purity and austerity and simplicity. And the planning of the space, it was a 2-acre site with lots of trees. So again, I think somewhere the space wrapping around the trees, forming that courtyard for contemplation, everything in a very pure white. I think there was a certain significance of the yantras, the plan forming around the yantras, which are very powerful symbols within the Jain philosophy. And to really let the space be a porous space in terms of being very, very open at the ground level, connecting with the courtyards, connecting with the trees, and connecting with the water, allowing space for collaboration, discussion, display. And as you start to move into the courtyard spaces, you start to see how the space flows through. Everything here was built around sustainable design techniques, right from the construction to the climatic performance of the building, with the screen systems, with the water bodies and the evaporative cooling, with orientations and wind movements. So water tends to cool the breeze as it flows over, and then it kind of flows through the screens, and whenever air moves through those tiny screens and then expands, you get that further cooling effect. There was very little use of electricity, if at all, because that, I think, is again a part of I think the more rigorous sects tend to shun contemporary technology and electricity.
Yeah.
So this was one of the, I think, driving forces behind the project.
That's right.
But yeah, I think this is a wonderful space, where thoughts and ideas and the spirit can flow seamlessly through the space. Am I missing anything here?
No.
Right?
Great.
This was a admin and training center in Latur. This was for a sugar production company where they already had all their production, growing facilities on site. And this was a project that needed to be added in there. 1 second.
It's the last project.
Okay, that's a little bit hazy, but okay. So I think I think going back to the foundational roots of the practice in terms of understanding the vernacular, and the location of this project in the Deccan area meant it's very, very close to Aurangabad and was it to Hyderabad, right?
Yeah.
So the influences were many, both I think historically and socially within the region. And that translated to a very specific language that had been developed culturally on the site itself and in the region. So I think the first point was to actually study that language. They had these very specific and very unique arches that were part of the language. I think this describes the proximity to regions of diverse cultural influences. And you can see it's a very specific language of the arch, of the color, of the kind of ornamentation and signage they use in that space. And this
And
again,
the climate.
and yes, the climate being obviously very, it was hot and dry, so one needed to again look at traditional architecture in terms of larger wall surfaces and thicker volumes with very simply choreographed openings, which would thermally protect the building. And I think that translated as well into the design of the project. And of course, you can see both the vocabulary of shaded spaces, sheltering you from the sun, as well as the language of the arches in that space, the architectural language developed within that culture.
This is still just images from Latur.
And of course, the courtyards, as climatic control devices. They're wonderful images from the region, which will then find a contemporary interpretation. Again, the building material, and I found this very interesting because when Shimul told me they used compressed stabilized earth blocks developed along with Hunar Shala, the first question was, did they use soil from the site? And she said no, because that would impact the actual growing process, and she didn't want to tamper with that. So again, a very sustainable way of building using 70% of quarry dust coming in as refuse from nearby quarries, and mixes of cement, sand, and metal to build this basic building block for the project. Everything formed on site. So again, I think a sympathy both to local context as well as to the local labor in terms of empowering local agencies to build this project.
Also creating a very, very insulating block.
Yeah. And you can see the highlighted portions are the administrative block. The center block is the administration with the research wing to the right, and the dining area and public facilities to the left. So it's very nice to see you're actually coming in axially to this coconut grove. I think even the overall site planning is drawing very strongly from the garden planning traditions of the region, in a sense, in terms of having a very strong visual access with the landscape, with the water, that then I think bows down to a horizontal access once you get into the buildings. You can see a better understanding of the central administration block, the training on the research training on the right, and the common facilities and dining to the left. Everything formed with the traditional vocabulary of the courtyards, the shaded walkways. Something to add in?
No, I just want us to move fast.
And I think that gives you an idea of the massing. Again, very, very important to note how these blocks are insulated with very, very solid outer walls. The fenestrations are perfectly choreographed, and they are also thickened, and I think the walls are oriented in a way to shield from the south and west sun and then let in more east and north light.
Slightly.
Yes.
So very few openings, just to bring in the intense sun.
And you can start to see the sections operate, and there's a very interesting language towards the inside around the courtyards, where the traditional arches have been reinterpreted as very light steel elements that hold up the primary circulation spaces which overlook the courtyard. So again, you see these resonances with history, I think, permeating through the project. And I think with all of Shimul's work, I think you're going to see a wonderful development of texture, light, and the sympathetic and sustainable environment developing through here. I hope to see this up very soon, Shimul.
It's under construction.
That's
Thank you very much. Thank you.